cloud. Okay. Good morning and welcome to APOLAN's webcast. And it's titled Monetizing the Value of Passive Optical LAN for Developers, Owners, Property Managers, and Tenants. Today we have a great set of panelists. I'd like to introduce you to three of the four right now. Alan Birch, the president of Quipsys. He also sits on the board for APOLAN and is very active in the marketing committee, membership committee, et cetera, and is actually a former chair. And then we have Mike Vermeer. He is engineering strategy manager with Panduit, and he's also very active on the marketing committee with APOLAN. And myself, I'm going to be the moderator, and I may have some speaking roles today. I'm a director at Tellabs with the marketing group, and I also sit on the board and chair the marketing committee. We're going to have Brian Davis on here as well. He's the marketing development manager director with Corning, and he's going to be taking some of our questions too. So let me tee up today's conversation. And the way I wanted to do is first by doing a shout out to the technology group. They did a great job on this cost study relative to passive optical LAN and comparing it to a traditional network design. And it's really day one capital savings. They looked at a small building, 4-story. They looked at a mid-sized building, 7 stories, and they looked at a campus, 4 buildings with each 6 stories. And truly, this is day one costs. And they took into account the equipment, the cabling, and even some of the infrastructure and facility costs relative to exiting a closet. And as you can see, there's some great savings relative to deploying a passive optical LAN design. What we want to talk about today is more around day 2 financial impact, the operational savings over the lifetime of this passive optical LAN, and look at, where is the value even outside of the IT department? Where is the value for developers and owners and property management firms and the tenants, employees who occupy these buildings? To do this, we're going to tee up 5 questions to our panelists. First, we're going to look at who benefits from passive optical LAN and how. How do these advantages differ across all the different verticals within the enterprise markets? And where are the tangible gains? How can we quantify this for passive optical LAN? We'll look at how fiber-based network plays in this enterprise network, and as we converge new systems over it. And then we'll talk about the future, how this is going to play out over time, the end-to-end cradle to grave of it. So with that, let me get into my first question. And I'll go ahead and give that to Alan. And Alan, if you could talk to the value to developers and owners of deploying a passive optical LAN.
All right, thank you, John. There's a lot of benefits to developers and owners, and we hit on this all the time about the scalable infrastructure, right? The ability to do lots and lots of things with this common fiber backbone, particularly when you add power to the mix. The converged networks providing both power and fiber out to the edge brings great advantage when you start looking at freeing up space and power within the building. So obviously that's got some capital expenditure reductions at the front end, but going forward, it's less energy to actually run these networks with less rooms to condition, less power to drive active electronics. The nice thing about this is we're seeing buildings get more and more intelligent, right? So this gives you the ability to effectively support smart building initiatives while also driving like amenities and tenant and resident services over this as well. And we see that more and more developers and owners, particularly ones that are in it for the long haul, they're not building these buildings just merely to flip them, seeing the advantage of leveraging these technologies to support not only all their wired connectivity in these buildings, but their wireless, that being Wi-Fi, but also cellular enhancement, with 5G and private LTE networks right around the corner, the ability to leverage this expansive network to support those growing needs is very huge benefit to them.
Okay. And, a different persona here, Mike, how about the benefits to property management and operators and service providers of these buildings? Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, especially when you look at property managers. So a property manager is responsible for the whole shell of a commercial building. They're looking at not only the physical shell, but also now more and more a lot of the intelligence features within the building. So they're responsible for access control and security, comfort systems, HVAC, a lot of these things that are more and more speaking and communicating on the network as well. So Passive Optical LAN provides an ability to centrally manage these networks that are supported by the property managers. Because Passive Optical LAN is inherently centralized and has fewer TR closets, they can manage the network from a single telecommunication room instead of having to manage through distribution across their property. So that's one. For them, Passive Optical LAN also allows them to more easily bring connectivity to public spaces, courtyards, and multiple buildings in longer runs using fiber. It has more distance capability. And then finally, from a security perspective, it reduces the network vulnerability points. Passive Optical LAN has fewer vulnerability points and reduces the attack surface. So it's inherently easier and requires less to secure that network because of that smaller attack surface.
Sure. And the last piece of this puzzle is the tenants and the employees, and certainly in this tight job market these days, everyone wants to have a great place to go to work at and have all the great amenities. So I'm sure there's some good reasons why a fiber-based network works for tenants and employees. So Alan, maybe you could speak a little bit more to that.
You could do a whole session on this group of users, right? So I think what I'll do is I'll pick out an example. When you talk about tenants, users, and guests, what's one of the environments where you would find all of these people, and that's in senior living, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got lots and lots of networks, and in a continuing care retirement community, you've got lots and lots of buildings and lots of units within that. So that scale and reach, makes Passive Optical LAN uniquely suited to support that. But additionally, you've got residential needs, triple play in the home. You've got building administrative needs, so like community Wi-Fi, signage, AV stuff. You've got security, right? So you need to put cameras, and gone are the days when your local cable operator would just go feed the triple play, and then the owner has to figure out how to manage their security vendor in their own network, and they need a robust Wi-Fi to support healthcare needs, et cetera, et cetera. So the ability to have all this on a converged network is obviously hugely beneficial to the owner or developer. But from an end user perspective, the flexibility to seamlessly travel across these networks or silo people from the networks is a valuable ability inside of these types of environments. So for the different users, the residents are loving it because they've got blazing fast internet experience. They've got great television. They've got the ability to walk anywhere on campus and basically print back to their units, features like that. And then the actual users themselves have a scalable network that's meeting all their administrative needs as well.
Yeah, it all comes down to the user experience and whether they're coming on the wired or the wireless network. If they're happy, well, the business is happy and the employer is happy as well.
Sure. Okay,
so let's tackle our next topic, and it's how do advantages differ across the different market verticals? And as Alan said, we could spend a day talking about all of these market verticals, but I thought we would just pick a couple out as examples. And the first one actually is going to go, how about Mike, you want to take hospitality?
Yeah, sure. Hospitality is interesting because it's to the consumer business often versus business to business. And there's a high level of importance on visually compelling spaces. That's really one of the advantages of passive optical LAN here, because the smaller cabling backbones used for passive optical LAN are less obtrusive, and it gives a lot of flexibility for architects, not only on day one to create the most compelling space, but when you have a passive optical network backbone, it's a lot easier to work around for architectural redesigns and things like that. Beyond that, with hospitality, one of the really important metrics are return on the floor space asset on a property. So the business metric is how much revenue are we getting out of the existing floor space? And so any floor space that's not revenue generating, like a telecommunication room closet, if you can replace that room and integrate that room into maybe a couple of guest spaces per floor, there's an ability to create more revenue out of that space, and or even move telecommunication assets from high revenue, high potential revenue spaces in the building to maybe something farther away in the parking garage or something. So the flexibility to use the floor space, you might have space there that you can apply to revenue generating applications.
Yes. And then how about Alan? I know you're using senior living as an example for user experience, but really there's so much to talk about with MDUs. How about you have any thoughts about MDUs?
As we're seeing, like your homes get smarter, we're also seeing apartment homes and condominiums, get smarter. The need for greater connectivity. We're actually doing what we like to refer to as a private broadband, where these properties are actually eliminating cable operations and basically building their own network. So the security vendor plugs into that network. The AV guy, or they'll get a managed Wi-Fi person. They can bring their own IP television strategy to the property. So we're seeing more and more these properties actually leveraging the ability to bring their own private broadband network to satisfy not only the tenant requirements, but the base building requirements and any other amenities that they need to drive to that property.
Yeah, and these can be senior living, student living, all sorts of different entities in the MDU.
Right. The business arrangement, the network looks largely the same, right? If that's an apartment, it's a condo, it's a hotel, building. The network looks largely the same. It's typically the business and service arrangements that are different, vertical to vertical. And
then, Brian, I thought you could talk about just a corporate environment, a headquarters, shall I say, and the value there for using a passive optical LAN.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest things, just kind of the day one cost savings you can get out of implementing this, and really streamlining the architecture to save on the build of that network on day one. But then the flexibility that an IT staff and the building owners, the corporation would have to expand that network and make jumps from things like Wi-Fi 5 to 6 to even 7, or 4G to 5G to even 6G, without having to pull any additional cable, because you have everything in place to be able to do that. But then when you think about the software aspect of these and what can be deployed over these networks, you can really increase the productivity of your IT staff. Things like template-based provisioning to once you plug in one like say an access point, you give it a template, and as you plug all those in, the network automatically knows how to provision those ports. And so there's some IT productivity comes with that, and along with bandwidth management, being able to throttle up and down into certain areas. And then finally, and just from the technology perspective, the flexibility you get around whether it's point to multi-point technology or point-to-point technology, and being able to give specific or provide specific requirements into even down to the department level around how much connectivity needs to be there. So I think there's a lot of things. Somewhat day one savings, of course, that's their flexibility and not having to spend on day two and beyond, and then the productivity, the gains that an IT staff can get out of the network.
Yeah, and that applies to all verticals, because what we've seen is all the verticals have a corporate office. And so whether you're talking about oil and gas or manufacturing, they all have perhaps a call center or something that has this true office environment.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, and let's start to talk about where we see these tangible gains. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Brian, because I know you have some good examples for sustainability. So perhaps you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, it's top of mind for all of us at this point. I mean, we have to be considering the environment, and we have to consider it in small ways and large ways. And so some of the numbers that I'll talk about here in a second may not seem that large, but actually from the impact of the network, it's quite impactful when you think about the entire building. So in terms of what I mentioned a second ago and what's already been mentioned by others, that day one savings and streamlining the network means that we can eliminate up to 70% of the linear feet of cable in a building, and typically that's going to be copper twisted pair. So you're taking literally tons of copper out of a building. And that provides for the benefit and some of the modeling that we've done of a 1% reduction in the embodied carbon of a building. Again, 1% may not sound like a lot, but when you think about all the various initiatives and ways to try to decrease the amount of carbon that we're putting into buildings and getting that out of just the network infrastructure is extremely impactful, especially when you put it in light of the fact that, I mean, when they're taking the building materials and they get a 1% reduction, it's massive. And think about how much of concrete and steel is in a building and getting that out of it. So I think it's very impactful from that perspective. Also, through an optical LAN, you get better port utilization, and again, being able to give the flexibility around where you're directing bandwidth and that type thing, centralizing your electronics so that you get better bandwidth, not putting a dedicated port out to every desktop if you were to do something like wireless first. All these come into play to drive a better utilization of the network electronics themselves. So we're going to use less power and less cooling, and that can get to a reduction of 1 to 1.5% in the operational carbon within a building. So, I mean, these numbers are actually very impactful in terms of what this can deliver. And it makes the point that while we've been talking about passive optical LANs for a long time, and we do have this large status quo kind of hurdle that the industry across the board is having a tough time to get over, we have to think differently about how we architect our networks. And through an optical LAN, it provides these type of very impactful benefits that have to be considered.
Yeah, thank you for being so quantifiable. That was some great numbers. One of my favorite numbers was out at Sandia National Labs, and when they did a retrofit there and installed a passive optical LAN, they got like $80,000 for recycling of the copper. Okay, so Alan, you're next up. How about speaking to where the tangible financial gains are for wireless? And I guess that can be Wi-Fi or cellular based.
It can be a little bit of all of the above, I think, for the foreseeable future. It's really funny when I entered the optical LAN market about 12 years ago. I had a really good friend and solid technology strategist, and told him what we were doing with the fiber-based networks, and he just kind of laughed at me and he goes, dude, everything's going wireless, right? And it's like, well, that's great, but I've never seen a wireless radio didn't have a cable sticking out of the back end of it, right? So the beautiful thing is our cable is fiber, and that fiber is going to support pretty much whatever for the foreseeable future in terms of bandwidth, the ability to run multiple services over the different lights. I mean, it's just the flexibility that it brings is immense. We've talked a lot about Wi-Fi. There's a lot of applications where you can't just run multiple SSIDs over the common, radios. You actually have to stand, separate Wi-Fi networks up for, either PCI compliance or security requirements, et cetera. So the ability to reach these locations, create a network aggregation point where that device is going to sit. We're seeing the application where you're using the Ethernet connectivity of an optical LAN to support small cell initiatives simultaneously to the Wi-Fi initiatives, and then there's pure cellular. A lot of times it bypasses the Ethernet component of the network, but it's still taking advantage of that fiber and hopefully powered fiber deep. But as this continues to evolve, I mean, you already start to see the issue at hand is, at some point, this radio that I've got in the hallway here of my, MDU of my hotel, of my office building, at some point, there's going to be a different technology transmitting out of this location, right? So I'm going to have to get on a ladder, put that new radio up, right? Is that radio going to take, a Cat6 cable? It's going to take multiple Cat6 cables. It's going to be, fed fiber direct, smarter people than me are probably working on that right now. But the ability to have that aggregation point where you just take that new radio, that new jumper cable, and potentially the new interface to your fiber location, it becomes an exercise on a ladder, right? Maybe potentially a cross connect somewhere. And then maybe some network configuration, but the days of ripping and replacing that cabling infrastructure are long gone. And that's, I think, one of the most beneficial gains in the wireless segment is the flexibility to support all of the stuff we've got today, as well as the stuff that, we're not sure what's coming down the road yet.
And everyone's living that right now with the migration to Wi-Fi 6, right? And thank goodness for multi-rate Ethernet ports that we can connect things now at 2.5, 5 gig or 10 gig, whatever it takes.
Yep. We got 10 gig variants of optical LAN. We've got the ability to support active Ethernet over these platforms as well. So the flexibility to support the bandwidth limitations presented by the radio or the edge cabling. Our core infrastructure, that fiber component is going to support whatever the heck it is. We just continue to evolve the technologies to support it, at the head end and at the edges. We're going to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, if I could add on to what Alan just stated, I think it's important also, going back to what I was commenting about the benefits to a corporate HQ. This would go to any benefit of any facility. If it is a ladder exercise, which it will be, and if it is a swapping things out at the end, which is exactly what it could be with an optical LAN, then that disruption and downtime, not only the cost of having to rip and replace or add new cabling, but the disruption and downtime that's avoided is extremely impactful in a lot of ways, to just from a productivity aspect in a corporate HQ or from a revenue generation aspect inside of a hotel or an MDU. These things have grave impacts, and that's something to point out. I just want to add on to what you're saying, Alex. I think that's an important aspect of just being able to change things out at the end and not have to rip and replace cable.
If you've ever been in a HEPA cart in a hospital, you'll know exactly what Brian's talking about.
That's exactly where I was going. I don't think we're going to cover healthcare today, but that's a great example. Hey, one thing I forgot to do at the beginning was to encourage you all to type in questions. Once we get to the end of this presentation, we're going to go into a Q&A time. And I really want to see some questions from all the attendees. So remember to type that into your Zoom Q&A field. Okay, so the next topic is going to be this as a service. And I'm going to take that one because I really wanted to turn that into talking about three things. I wanted to talk about mixed use. I wanted to talk about multi-tenant. And then I wanted to talk about passive optical LAN as a service. And they're similar, but there are some slight differences. But the really cool thing about it is that they represent a business model where passive optical LAN turns into a revenue generator, which is a whole new topic. So if we look at mixed use, Alan's examples of senior living and student living, but also airports and stadiums and hospitality have mixed use. And I want to speak right now about airports. Let's say LaGuardia Terminal B, where you got wired, you got wireless, you got signage and kiosks and retail and dining and security and airport services. And travelers are coming onto this network, airlines are coming onto this network, vendors are coming onto this network, and airport services. These pole connectivity are inside and they're outside on the tarmac, and they reach miles across these expansive airport properties. So to be able to do that with a single infrastructure and over fiber is tremendous. A little wrinkle to that is, let's say out at LaGuardia, you have highly reliable ticketing and baggage claim systems or baggage systems on this network as well. And with the PON network, you can do protection at redundant OLTs, cards, and ports, and ONTs, and then you can look at the path protection, the health of the end-to-end connection, and make switching decisions. And what I mean about PON protection at the ONT is you can do PON diversification, where you actually intermix ONTs on different optical splitters. So you can have ticket agents elbow to elbow, and they're not going to experience the same network issues at the same time. So that's a very highly reliable network, and PON can do it economically. So multi-tenant, you got retail, shopping malls, subleases, and in government agencies, you might have multiple agencies in the same building. And you can handle this on a PON, on a pole network, with strict VLAN segregation and the force forward aspect of the packet flow PON. So a packet goes directly from an ONT to that data center to the upstream router, and it doesn't traverse multiple racks and stacks of switches. And then I think Brian actually mentioned this, those ONTs and those subtended power devices, once you set up those global profiles and templates, that can be plug and play in these environments. And then better yet, at the management, you can have role-based access, you can have permission-based provisioning. So the staff only see what they have authorization to see. And then with XGS-PON, you got bidirectional encryption, and you have multiple wavelengths. So you could actually put different services on different wavelengths. Like that Wi-Fi 6, put it on a 10 gig wavelength. And these are the types of things that we'd be talking about also if we were talking about PCI and HEPA requirements as well. So last one, Passive Optical LAN as a service. This is more a service provider model, and we've been seeing it growing in popularity relative to software as a service, platform as a service, and this is a network as a service. And pole is perfectly suited for this because of its reach, distance, its reliability, its security, and its operational efficiencies. It's kind of a throwback to its roots and the service provider roots when we start talking about pole as a service. So those are some unique things where the network can actually be a revenue generator. So next up, we wanted to shift gears and talk about this convergence. And over time, we've been, we started with voice, video, and data, and now we're trying to bring on anything else that has an RJ45 port. And this IT and OT convergence. And Mike, I know you had a lot of really good thoughts about this, so I thought perhaps you would kick off this discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. The aim of convergence, as I see it, is to make buildings smarter and more efficient, not only in how they're designed, but in their continuing operation. So the objective is that you can program any system to do anything, but the advantage of converging the different systems is to allow one system, maybe access control, to seamlessly integrate to another system, maybe it's lighting, and do so ongoing, so that your overall building gets smarter. So the first step of this is your physical layer convergence. So Passive Optical LAN is ideal, since you might have a small backbone, maybe 2, maybe 6 fiber, that provides support for Passive Optical LAN. You can start putting other systems on there. Maybe it's a DAS, or maybe it's a separate to the edge application. And as you do that, you have a lot of flexibility to expand. Maybe you want to expand one system versus the other, but as as passive optical LAN uses the same type of fiber as other systems, you can start converging the physical layer, and then as you go, you can actually start expanding the passive optical LAN system in the future. And the other thing is related to convergence. Passive optical LAN ties into the overall network architecture. It ties into the corporate data center, the server systems. It's great for expanding the access layer, going out further distances, large distributed networks. So it gives you a lot of flexibility there to add in maybe a perimeter gate and applications like that.
Yeah, and taking this conversation further, Brian, I'm sure you have an opinion on how fiber cabling helps all this out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we've talked in this industry for a long time. We're all very well aware of the bandwidth requirements or bandwidth capabilities of fiber. Let me just state it this way, though: we really don't know the actual bandwidth limit of single mode fiber. We don't know that. So then it comes to question, okay, well, that's all great, but why would we need that much? And Mike just touched on a lot of it, and a lot of it is, it's not about a single application or a single data point or data port that we're trying to drive at this point. So many things are happening in aggregate that's what's going to create the I need more bandwidth out of the edge of the network to serve these multiple devices. And with this architecture, it enables us to connect those, like a lot of the wired devices, connecting them multiples off of one wire, because we just have way too many devices to cable them all independently. So again, this idea of what's happening on our networks, because IP won the war. Okay, that's a given. A lot of what Mike talked about all the systems that are already coming onto IP, onto Ethernet, or that will be coming, and then that happened in aggregate. And then in combination with what we're doing around wireless connections, and less and less about a connection for a single device out of the desktop. And then finally, so there's the bandwidth, and I think again in aggregate, that's really what's driving the need for that, and why fiber can solve for all of that. Secondly, I think you get the flexibility of reach, and we're so ingrained about 100 meters. Like, I cannot go any further than 100 meters. It is, and I've said this before, I would liken it to the fact of that was what was thought about the 4-minute mile. No one will run faster than a 4-minute mile until people did, and then that was just shifted, and I think 17 people broke it in the next 18 months or something like that. But my point being that we get ingrained in a way that we've done things for a long time, and we don't even see the need. And so 100 meters is actually, it's quite a limiting factor to the architecture and the way we design networks. And that's both inside and outside. If I can reach every spot within a network from inside a building, both any connections inside as well as outdoor Wi-Fi, outdoor security, outdoor small cells, that's a tremendous advantage as in an operational and in a day one cost savings. But then think about that and how we've applied this in facilities where it would be natural. So I can kind of understand, I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but I can kind of understand, like in the in-building space, how we get so ingrained around 100 meters and almost trapped. But it doesn't make sense to me when we go to airports, John, like you mentioned, large footprint facilities, and we still think, well, I'll just repeat every 100 meters. Or in a warehouse and logistics, I'll just repeat. I'll just hang a closet, a pseudo closet up in the ceiling and just repeat every 100 meters. Or a factory, or the data center environment, where data centers are huge facilities now. And so having the reach of fiber allows us to open up the aperture and really change the way we design that network, that it's beneficial based on the building itself. And it's almost like, design the network to the building instead of designing the building around the network aspect of things.
Yeah, and Brian, I still can't beat the 4-minute mile.
Neither can I.
Okay, so another point on convergence is when we all started out in this industry, there was a reluctance to put secure communications onto the PON. And I just wanted to speak to that. And, first what I wanted to do was, it's hard to put a dollar value to this. What is the dollar value of operating more secure networks? Well, when there is a breach, things go bad and they go real bad. And, an average company might be looking at, a $1 million loss relative to a breach, and that can be financial, it can be in reputation. It's bad stuff. So hard to put a value to this, but what I want everyone to hear is that regardless of whether the event is malicious or negligent, and regardless of whether it's intentional or unintentional, the impact on the business is the same. It's bad. So, how do we operate more secure networks? Here's what we know. We know that fiber cabling is more secure than copper cabling. Why? Because it doesn't emit, nor is it susceptible to electrical magnetic interference. And we know it's harder to tap. We also know that a passive optical LAN design can eliminate tens or hundreds or thousands of management interface ports or full functioning ports. And those are all security gaps, okay? And if you're having conversations about cybersecurity insurance and the complexity there and the expense there, these are the conversations that you want to have with your insurance agent about how passive optical LAN is a more secure network. Okay, so over time we've seen this greater acceptance of putting back office and OT and building management and secure communication, security cameras, building access over the passive optical LAN. And why? Once again, strict security, strict VLANs, force forward architecture, not traversing a bunch of rack and stack switches just from the OT to the upstream router, direct path, role-based network control access, permission-based provisioning, so that those IT staff only see the features and functions that they are authorized to impact. And then once again, XGS-PON, bidirectional encryption, and multi-wavelengths. Lots of really tricky things you could do with the multiple wavelengths. So you should have lots of confidence to put all communications, all connectivity onto this passive optical LAN. I want to comment on the federal government because there are military and intelligent networks in the federal government that absolutely require physical separation. Well, what they learned was since PON can do this in a more economical manner, greater reach, better distance, if you're going to have this physical separation, you can do it more economically with a PON. So I could show you some very pretty pictures, but that would be classified information, of multicolored ONTs and multicolored cabling and the fiber infrastructure that goes along with that in these military and intelligent networks, where the communications share the same bundle and share the same infrastructure. And if that was done over traditional design, they could not have done that. It would have had to have been separate bundles for the secure network connectivity. Why? Because of the EMI, because of the bleed, because of the crosstalk. That doesn't happen with the fiber. So even if you have to do a physically separated network, you can actually do it within the same bundle and using the same fiber infrastructure. So that's a little input on the federal government. Okay, so we're going to switch gears, but please type in your questions. We're going to get to questions after this section. And now we're going to talk about the value of adaptation over time. And we'll put Alan up to bat and kind of talk about the refresh cycles and product life cycles and how do you work within that environment.
Yeah, thanks, John. So we've kind of touched on this. When you think of future value of adaptation, we've talked about the fact that you put fiber in, you're not going to have to recable. The moves, adds, and changes, they become exercises on ladders and not getting up in ceilings and pulling cable. You start to quantify it with to Brian's point, the disruption to the workspace to have to go through such a significant exercise. You did a proof of concept with a customer yesterday. We had to get access to a floor box. We had floor box up and 4 cones around it, and we were doing our thing. And people were just walking by us. We weren't disrupting the workspace at all. So I mean, I think at this point in the webinar, most everybody's kind of getting and understanding that. I think what you look at it in terms of money, right? Then obviously not having to make that investment, not having to endure the financial strain of the impact of doing this. But there's another piece that we haven't covered at all today, and that's we're starting to see these organizations that are trying to grade buildings on their connectivity, their survivability, their sustainability, all that type of stuff. TIA's got a program that does that. I'm sure everybody's heard of Wired Score. And the end game of these institutions and these programs is that the better your building is in terms of all of these things, connectivity, sustainability, access, security, et cetera, most of which our network provides the core for. The higher your score, the more valuable your building becomes, not only in terms of rent, and lease amounts, et cetera, but when you actually go to sell this building 10, 15 years down the road, they're targeting 5 to 7% increase in the value of the building based on these very favorable scores. So you have 6 to 8 criteria to satisfy that to get the best possible score, and our network is essential to 75% of those scoring criteria. You can certainly see the value of putting in an optical LAN in these buildings.
That was very interesting, Alan. I'm glad you mentioned Spire and that 5 to 7% potential increase in building value. We've always been able to attach a value to pushing fiber to a house. And that house has greater value if it connects with fiber. And pushing fiber to an MDU, or pushing fiber to an apartment, or those have all been quantifiable, but the logic does follow that if you fiberize a enterprise building, it's going to have greater value. Okay, so we're going to go back to wireless because this has a big part of this. And Brian, how about I don't think you've spoken too much about the wireless, but perhaps you can take this topic relative to the future evolutions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that to talk about the way we use wireless, whereas it used to be kind of mobility by exception, not that long ago, it's now mobility by rule. And part of that's been enabled by the capabilities of wireless. And if we talk about Wi-Fi technology specifically, I mean, the enhancements that have been made over the past couple of generations and what now is pretty much a default of Wi-Fi 6, it's a phenomenal jump over the, not only the bandwidth, because that's the number we typically pay attention to, but the number of sessions is really as important, if not more important, in the way they can handle multiple devices simultaneously. And so we see that becoming a very, very important part of the way that we connect the networks and in a corporate environment, the way that we work, actually. So having the capability of evolving through that is extremely important. And again, like I said, it's more by it's by rule now. It's not a wish or this will be a really nice to have. And a lot of environments, as we're seeing, and I actually work in one that is a wireless first environment. And so in this building, the idea was to provide connectivity anywhere for anyone on anything. So regardless of who walks in here, a utility type approach to connectivity. And wireless has a big portion of that, both Wi-Fi and cellular. And so having that capability, but it takes a tremendous bandwidth, like Alan said. You've yet to see a wireless access point that didn't have a wire attached to it. And so being able to feed that bandwidth and have that connectivity, not only for today's generation, but as we think about what's happening with the connectivity for Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi 6 and 6E are going to have M-Gig ports and capability of 9.6 gigabits of backhaul. When we go to Wi-Fi 7, which I would contend is just not that far away. I mean, there's numbers anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And again, Wi-Fi 6 is really a lot of our population is jumping to Wi-Fi 6 right now. The bottom line is, like, with a 32 to 40 gigabits, so let's call it, it doesn't matter. It's multiples of 10 gig, which means that am I going to really apply, like we've been talking about in this industry for a while, am I going to pull 2 to 4 category cables to every access point location? There's got to be a better way, and fiber provides that, the ability to get fiber and power deep and be ready for those transitions in aggregate. And you're basically moving all of the ports that are desktop and locating up in a wireless access point. And again, that could be Wi-Fi, it could be cellular. And the last point I make about wireless is that we're on the cusp of seeing private 5G networks start to be deployed. And it's not, are we talking Wi-Fi or cellular? Or let's, because you talk about cellular, you got capacity, I just need to make my phone work. And then coverage, may need to make my phone work, and capacity, the idea around, hey, I'm going to use this network for something else. And I think we're going to see the standing up of private 5G networks besides to augment Wi-Fi networks. It's not either or, it's both and a fiber infrastructure really provides the value and the benefit of being able to do that today and be ready for the next jumps in technology. Again, as we jump to 40 gig backhaul, as we look at a terabit on 6G or whatever we end up classifying 6G as, lots of conversation about that. But fiber is going to be the way to enable that, or else we're just stuck in this idea around the how many 10 gig links can I pull out to a location. And in terms of, for those on the call, I'm sure we're all familiar with the levels of category cabling and where we've been to in that area. So Cat 6A does 10 gigabit per second at 100 meters, and that's the max. Okay, there's 7 and there's 7A. It gives you 10 gigabit per second. You can get to 40 gig over copper, but that's Cat 8 and only goes 30 meters. So when you think about that, the only option is to pull more and more of that, replace it with fiber, and then you're ready for all of the wireless transitions or wireless jumps in technology off of a single layer of infrastructure.
Great information. Anyone notice those screaming fast download and upload speeds on that phone? Man, must be fiber. Okay, Mike, I don't know how to tee up this last section other than smart buildings get smarter. I mean, where is this going to go?
Yeah, and Brian had some really great points on fiber and on wireless as a future. But one thing that we often don't see and don't consider is there's a lot of wires in a building right now that aren't even Ethernet, like they're serial and analog today. And what that means is they're often not thought about at all in terms of communications, and they make up, if not the majority, then a very significant part of the communication connections in a building. And what's happening elsewhere in the building systems is vendors and industries are starting to say, wait, we need better communications, and we also need to be able to enable a smarter building. So we're seeing a lot of future potential for the parts of the communication system in the building that are often just beyond the walls, above the ceiling, and not thought about, that are heading toward Ethernet. So when you think about that, that smart buildings getting smarter means more wired connections behind the walls that nobody even thinks about, a part of the smart building. That puts more demand for wired connectivity. And also, if fiber is already in place, supporting the local area network, supporting the wireless connection, supporting maybe cellular, DAS, and other systems, there's good reason to take that infrastructure and expand it and converging parts of the building automation system into that. So it's not, don't want to forget the parts of the building that we often forget because they just work, and you bring in an integrator to make changes to them because you have no idea how they work.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so we have reached the Q&A portion of this presentation, this webinar, and I'm going to ask once again, you all can type a question into, I think it should be in the Zoom banner. You'll see Q&A field there. Type a question in there, and we'll pass it around to our panelists. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that and tell you a little bit about APOLAN. You know, we are an association that is here focused on figuring out how to better market, design, install, and educate the total industry on passive optical LAN. And we are comprised of a solid group of members, and we'd love for you to join us. And if you were to join us, you could help out with webinars like this and the trainings that we do at BICSI, and we do research with Bizaria as well. And we push out lots of great news, social media, and articles, and we'd love for your company to help us out on that too. So those are the kind of things that we do here at the association. And back to questions. So the first one came up twice, so we may actually turn this into a panel question. And it is, well, the one writes, what is the benefit of optical LAN for retrofits? Or is this always new builds? So, you know, Mike, I was thinking maybe I'd throw that at you first. I mean, is it, you know, if you have a traditional network, do you have to keep going with traditional network, or can you make that switch to a passive optical LAN?
Yeah, that's a great point, because thinking about passive optical LAN, it's not necessarily a binary question. It's really, the passive optical LAN can be put in almost anywhere as an extension of your LAN. You think about it, similar things happened in broadband where you have fiber out to some part of the broadband network, and you can put an OLT at the end of that fiber and extend it and bring fiber further using the optical LAN network. So there's an opportunity for that. And then really it's an opportunity to go deeper. It's an opportunity to go deeper on the access layer for the network. So you can also do similar things with hybrid networks. When you have fiber in the building, you can attach passive optical LAN through there and both retrofit new and deeper LAN, take advantage of the fiber that you have in the building already.
And Brian, can I get you to speak to that topic?
Yeah, Mike covered it well in terms of, you know, how to integrate this in with existing LANs from an actor's perspective. I'll just add to that, thinking about the passive infrastructure alone, being as though you can collapse multiple cable runs. If I'm going into actually in a full retrofit of a building, pathways are limited. It is hard to grow pathways inside of a building that's already built. And having the capability of replacing multiple category runs, or in a historic building not having to hide as much cable, that's a major advantage to going in retrofit with an optical LAN, just simply because the infrastructure itself is so streamlined and takes up so much less space than what we have, you know, currently done in the past.
Yeah, and my ad is Gartner said that passive optical LAN is a no-brainer for new builds, but they paused on brownfield and retrofits. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is there has been some advancements in the technology. There is 48 port closet-based ONTs available, so you can do that direct one-to-one swap of an Ethernet switch. And there's also patch cords that do the adaptation between single mode fiber and multi-mode fiber. So you actually can push PON over a multi-mode fiber cabling network if that already exists in the building. So those two things are helping bring down the cost of doing PON retrofits. Okay. So there was a question about cost modeling, and that is available on the APOLAN website. I had the slide at the beginning of this presentation. There, the technology committee did a great job. So, and look for a webinar. There was a webinar that the technology committee did when they went through those cost savings. And perhaps we can send you a link directly. And then this question comes up, and I've heard it before, about in this MDU situation or a mixed use situation, sometimes the owner doesn't want to be the service provider. And Alan, I think you have a lot of experience in this, so perhaps you can speak to that. And it's the reluctance of a building owner to become a service provider.
Yep, understood. So there's like three key elements here. One is that they absolutely can use it as a revenue generation tool. The costs of the services, in bulk arrangements with alternate service providers. I'm not talking about bringing Comcast into this private network. So the upside is the property can make money, right? And so now it's like, well, I have to pay for this thing to own it. And the answer is yes. However, there's different ways to pay for it, right? So we can do network as a service on, let's call it a 5-year term, which is probably half to a third of what the cable operators are going to try to get the property to commit to. So if you take a television at $10 a door, you take a pro rata share of gigabit managed Wi-Fi at $20-25 a door, and we can build our network and put it on a 5-year term at $25-30 a door, there's still room for the property to make $40 or $50 a door. And then after 5 years, they own that network, and all they're doing is paying for support, right? So monetizing that network it can be done. And then third thing is support, right? That property owner doesn't want to take a phone call Thursday night because somebody thinks their internet's slow or their TV's pixelating, right? So these service providers, the entities that will deliver the television or the managed Wi-Fi, they're staffed up and built to take that first call. So in our arrangement, we typically take the second call, which is from that service provider saying, hey, it's not the Wi-Fi. Can you take a look at the optical LAN for us? So every aspect of covering those MDUs, we have addressed on dozens and dozens of occasions.
Okay.
Now, and if I could add to that real quick, I think that the other part of that is, they're used to getting the network for free.
Yep.
We know nothing's really for free. And what they miss out on is they do get that network day one, but there's some clauses in there, and there's some things that they kind of get stuck. So they're in this 10-year agreement without the ability to increase or add amenities. And very difficult to get devices added and that type of thing. So the support mechanism is really not all that great to start with. But I think it's more that amenities. And so as we talked earlier about how technology increases the value of a property, we talked earlier about how the guest experience is so important. Those two things, when the guest experience declines and the value of property goes down because they can't attract new tenants to come in and fill those spaces because they're stuck with technology that was put in 10 years ago, and they're at no point where they can upgrade it versus own it in themselves with a great model Alan just described, turn into revenue. And now with the mall fiber network, they can add those amenities and bring that up as needed when they want to without a whole lot of extra cost.
And the security, amenity connectivity, television walls and the gathering area, that type of thing. Now that's all been monetized as part of the service provider arrangement or the private broadband arrangement. That's not something you're going to get from Comcast. They're not going to let you plug your cameras into their network. That's not what it's for. It's to drag revenues out of your property.
Okay, good stuff. Mike, I'll squeeze in one last question for you. The question was, what are the operational benefits when PON exits a telecom closet? I think the technology committee covered that from a day one standpoint, but what are the advantages of managing a network that doesn't have all these telecom closets scattered around a building or a campus?
Yeah, thanks, John. So the telecom closets, every company is going to monetize their space differently or think of the cost of their buildings differently. But you can look at that, for example, in a hospitality model. You take 2 IT closets per floor, every floor, and if that's a 10 by 10 room for all the equipment, and you have an opportunity to integrate that into maybe a larger suite, you have the opportunity to take that floor area, and depending on how your systems are built, easily charge a premium price for that system. I've heard similar things in terms of space utilization in education, or ability to, you know, back in the day when conference rooms were scarcity, adding additional conference room space. Like, there's a lot that you can do with the building, and that flexibility. Even looking at the distance limitation of fiber I mentioned, you can take that. If you need a conference room, you can take, or an IT closet, you can take that and move it elsewhere where the costs aren't so high. So passive optical LAN gives you those benefits.
Yeah, I saw a case study done in the K through 12 space where if you take the look at removing the telecom closets from one school, and then you apply that across a district, you're looking at cost savings that can pay for a teacher's salary, multiple teacher salaries. So that was a fantastic case study. Okay, we're really at our 60 minutes right now. So I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to thank Alan, Mike, and Brian. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Everybody look forward to the next webinar. That's going to be the Technology Committee. They're going to be covering 10 gig XGS-PON and the proper testing and implementation of 10G. If we didn't get to any of your questions, please contact us at the email address listed on this screen. And if you need more information, please visit our website. With that, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, John.